Cast, we'll hear about the author Angela Carter's love affair with radio in just a moment, after Julian Warwicker tells us about today's You and Yours.
Carolyn, good morning. Women having faulty PIP breast implants removed are on occasions being persuaded to have additional surgery. The British Association of Aesthetic Plastic Surgeons says in the vast majority of cases this isn't necessary, and they're speaking out against so-called cross-selling. Also today, compensation after the riots, why it's taking so long for some people to get what they're entitled to. Cheaper car insurance, if you're prepared to be monitored as you drive. And the latest technological developments on offer if you're buying a new television. Plus, SIM-only mobile phone deals and the science behind reducing the amount of salt in crisps, all after midday.
Thank you very much indeed, Julian. Now, the writer Angela Carter died 20 years ago today. Her friends and colleagues celebrate a little-known area of her work.
Settle down, please. Settle down. Emanations of the id to the back of the room. Apparitions from the unconscious and pre-conscious in the gallery. Pre-Christian survivals, fertility symbols, nightmares and ghouls in the pews to the right. Death signs, storm warnings to the left. Oedipal fantasies in the front row, please. And I'll thank you, poltergeist, to keep a firm hand on your impulses during the lecture.
Writing in 3 dimensions, Angela Carter's love affair with radio. The cast.
Carmen Callil. I was a friend of Angie's from the early 70s, but I was also her publisher at Virago and at Chatto and Windus.
I'm Marina Warner, and I'm a writer. And I first met Angela when she came into the offices of Vogue, where I was working.
Susannah Clapp. I'm the theatre critic of The Observer and a writer. I first met Angela when I was helping to set up the London Review of Books in 1979.
Christopher Frayling. I'm a writer and critic and broadcaster, and I knew Angela Carter very well in Bath in the 1970s.
Writing for radio involves a kind of 3-dimensional storytelling, so that a great number of things can happen at the same time. Radio always leaves that magical and enigmatic margin, that space of the invisible, which must be filled in by the imagination of the listener.
Carol McShane. I was a drama studio manager at the BBC between 1969 to 93.
Bob Giddings, and I'm a radio addict. As well as a teacher, I've been a reviewer of radio in various publications for more years than I care to think about.
Charlotte Crofts. I teach film at the University of West of England, and I've written about Angela Carter's writing for radio, film and television.
Sara Davies. I'm the producer. I have a long run of Angela Carter's books on my shelves. Novels, The Magic Toy Shop, Nights at the Circus, Wise Children, short stories, reworked fairy tales, journalism, provocative, clever essays challenging feminist orthodoxy on pornography. But I didn't know she'd written plays for radio until Charlotte Crofts told me about them. Between 1976 and 1984, she wrote 5, and all of them still in the BBC archives. What a haul.
Vampirella by Angela Carter, with Anna Massey as the Countess Vampirella, David Marsh.
Come unto these yellow sands, an imaginative reconstruction for radio by Angela Carter of the life and surviving paintings of Richard Dagg. The Company of Wolves, a play for radio by Angela Carter, based on her own short story. With Elizabeth Proud as Red Riding Hood, Michael Williams as the werewolf.
Puss in Boots by Angela Carter. An adult version of the well-known nursery story with Andrew Sachs as Puss, Mick Ford as the hero, Jill Lidstone as the heroine, and Francis Jeter as the...
A Self-Made Man, an exploration for radio of Ronald Furbeck, in which he speaks mostly in the words of his own fiction and letters, and his contemporaries also speak mostly in their own words. Written and compiled by Angela Carter. With Louis
it enabled her, in the way that maybe the written word didn't, to explore things. And she does really interesting things with the sound effects, and I think she had a very good relationship with Glyn Dearman, the director.
Glyn Dearman, whose style, sensitivity and enthusiasm would irradiate dramatised readings of the London Telephone Directory.
Most of the time, they just seem to think alike on how things should sound and how they should be. I think she felt there was a like mind there.
I'm sure that there is something in that collaborative mix, that Dearman was somehow the I might say, the midwife to her real qualities as a genius writer for radio.
I could hear him and feel him bouncing up and down on his chair sometimes with excitement when something worked particularly well.
I started writing for radio because of a sound effect. I made it quite by accident. Sitting in my room, pencil in hand, staring vacantly into space instead of getting on with whatever it was I was supposed to be doing, I ran the pencil idly along the top of the radiator. It made a metallic, almost musical rattle. It was just the noise that a long, pointed fingernail might make if it were run along the bars of a bird cage. Now, I thought, what kind of person might have such fingernails? Why, a vampire famed for their long, sharp fingernails, all the better to eviscerate you with. Now, what kind of vampire would have both long, elegant fingernails and an elegant gilt bird cage? A lady vampire, perhaps. I alliterated her. A lovely lady vampire. And she must be plucking those twanging, almost musical notes out of her birdcage, because, like me, she was bored.
She was translating Perrault at the time, the French fairy tales, and she was also very taken with Gothic myths, Dracula and Frankenstein, and the classic English Gothic novel.
In Hungary, in the county of Temesvar, those who fall sick of the fatal lethargy that follows my embraces say that a white spectre follows them, sticking as close to their heels as does a shadow.
Its artificiality, I think, appealed to her, and the exaggeration, and this almost parodic quality, where things are exaggerated so much that they almost become a parody of real life. That really did interest her. It interested me because at the time I was writing a big book about vampires in literature. So as you can imagine, we spent a lot of time chewing the fat over the midnight hour, all about spooks and Draculas and Countess Draculas and all the rest of it.
Night and silence. A bicycle is a solitary instrument. To ride a bicycle involves a continuous effort of will, and hence is a moral exercise. I never guessed here in the Carpathians would be no stars. No stars. No moon. I am just a little nervous.
In spring 1976, I went on a research trip to Transylvania, researching vampires, wandering around the mountains and talking to poets, writers, photographing a lot. Angela was very tickled at this thought of a fine, upstanding public school young chap, as I was in those days, wandering around Transylvania. And I don't think the idea for Vampirella came from, in fact, I know it didn't, from my trip, but I think the character of Hero may well have done. This sort of boy's own paper character who is riding a bike. I wasn't riding a bicycle, I was driving a Renault, but nevertheless, and he believes in sort of rationality and repressing his imagination. Thanks very much, Angie. And his sort of public school, the douche of cold shower celibacy will protect him against the nastiness of the vampires and everything.
A light? A homestead in this abandoned and desolate region? Yet that light does not console me. It does not make me think of home and hearth and fireside. It is a sinister and flickering light, like marsh fire. Oh, by God! A castle, with flambeaux at the gates.
A vast ruined castle, from whose tall black windows came no ray of light, and whose broken battlements showed a jagged line, like broken teeth. And at my gate I light the visitor a welcome with fire flowers plucked from hell.
Where are you going? Goodbye.
Her comic eye was daily and constant and in all her work. And then this great rococo imagination she had, fables, fairy stories, devils and tails and wings.
This must have been 76. And in fact, the day she recorded it, I was waiting in the car at Bath Station as she came back, and she was incredibly excited about her day in the studio. She said, do you know what? One of the people, it might even have been the producer, actually managed to do the Greek Orthodox Mass in the scene where Dracula reminisces about being staked, and you get this voice intoning the Orthodox Mass. It's absolutely marvellous. I wrote in the script Orthodox Mass, and somebody actually knew it and knew the words.
There the quarry lies, as ruddy in the tree.
And I think that's how she got the bug for radio, in a way, that she'd had such fun recording it.
The priest takes up a heavy sword.
Dracula!
So they strike off my head.
The radio plays are voices in the dark. She describes them as that herself. They connect very deeply to something that continued all her life, which was the vividness of the narrative voice. Radio lent itself absolutely perfectly to that. And the intimacy, she's really interested in inner landscapes, the inner turmoil, inner pleasure. And that inscape that is in all her novels can be captured on radio. And that flexibility, that speed of transition, she said herself that film can't achieve it or theatre can't achieve it, but radio can.
It is a wonderful opportunity for writers. There's no other medium quite like it. It renders, in terms of the possible, what in other forms is impossible. It is free of all the restraints that narrative prose fiction places on a writer.
I like to use radio not for creating dramas on a theatrical model, so much as to create complex, many-layered narratives that play tricks with time, and also to explore ideas, although for me that is the same thing as telling stories, since for me a narrative is an argument stated in fictional terms.
She talked about them to me towards the end of her life, when we were looking back in life in general. And she talked about growing up with the radio. I think it was for her a completely natural medium. It really gave her, in some sense, the building blocks for some of her subsequent work.
Born in 1940, I was a child of the radio age, although then we still called it the wireless. Weaned on the now-defunct Children's Hour, one of the most potent memories of my childhood is that of a serial, always repeated around Christmas, made out of John Masefield's fantastic novel, The Box of Delights, with its cast list of piratical rats and time-travelling Renaissance philosophers, its ineffable atmosphere of snow and mystery.
She had a Scheherazade imagination. She would tell you a story, and it was about life, everything fundamental, you know. The betrayals and events are always violent and primitive and real. Murder, death, everything that is sort of primitive in our lives. These are stories that live forever.
What'll we do, Granny? What shall we do?
Shut the shutters, bar the door, throw more logs on the fire, make a great blaze, keep the wolves outside.
The little girl is not timid. She's excited and she wants to do everything that is prohibited. That is the pleasure of fairy tale very often, that the reader or listener hears the prohibitions and realises that what is being prohibited is actually what is to be desired.
Should you escort me as far as my granny's house, sir, I'm sure my granny would gladly give you a cup of tea. Or maybe something a bit stronger, seeing as how we slipped a bottle of brandy in with the butter and cheese.
Delighted, delighted.
And me, all of a flutter, poor simple girl that I am, for he is such a handsome young fellow, for all his eyebrows do grow close together.
15, going on 16, the tenderest age. Under that red shawl, how white her skin must be, as white as breast of chicken, succulent as loin of pork.
Little miss, pretty miss, see what I have in my pocket.
Oh, I think it's deeply sexual too, when it's all that fur and skin and teeth. I mean, it's amazing. Sexually, it's her most profound work, I think.
What big eyes you have.
All the better to see you with, my pretty. You're a sight worth looking at.
What have you done with my granny?
There's nobody here but we two, darling.
Then fear of death came over me, I who had been afraid of nothing. For though I knew that he had just eaten, yet I know the wolf is always hungry. And I cannot cry for help because we are a good mile from the village. Yet, though I am among the wild beasts, I must not be afraid, because fear is their meat. So I must not suffer it. Who has come to sing to us?
Those are the voices of my brothers, darling. I love the company of wolves. Look out of the window and you'll see them.
How it's snowing. You can't see through the lattice, the pane all caked with snow.
Open the window.
And on the branches of the apple tree outside my granny's window were perched a fruit of wolves. It had become a wolf tree. They all staring at me with their big dumb eyes. Eyes with such sorrow in the pupils. 10 wolves, 20 wolves, more wolves than I could count. Eyes catching the light from the kitchen and shining like candles, each beast pointing its muzzle to the moon and howling, fit to break your heart. It's freezing cold, poor things. No wonder they howl so.
Are you cold too, my darling? Would you like a glass of brandy to warm you?
Oh, it's warm enough indoors by the fire.
Then take off your shawl.
What shall I do with it now?
Burn it, dear one. You won't need it again.
There's also this raunchy, this sort of pantomime side, and that comes through in Puss in Boots, which is based on Commedia dell'arte, Italian Commedia dell'arte masked. And she often goes for a sort of raucous, really rollicking sexuality.
It was Figaro here, Figaro there, I tell you. Figaro upstairs, Figaro downstairs, and oh my goodness me. This little Figaro can slip into my lady's chamber, smart as you like, at any time of the day or night. For what lady in all the world of any age, complexion or disposition could say no to my advances? To the passionate, indefatigable, yet toujours discret attentions of a marmalade cat.
Achoo! Oh, shut off. Bugger off. Get the hell out of it, you miserable cat.
Get the hell out of it yourself, you old hag. You don't come in till later. Anticipated your cue again.
Achoo!
Angie is both the hero and the cat. So if you read what she writes as the hero, making an ass of himself, getting things wrong, falling in love hopelessly. Oh, I cannot live without her. I'm on fire with love for her, he says. And Puss says, well, in that case, that'll save on the heating. So it's Angie talking to herself, but it's terribly funny.
There's a very comic and an exhilarating scene in Puss in Boots where they go to bed hammer and tongs and the bed springs twang and, the sighs and the sound of bliss.
Dearest.
Darling.
And at just this tender, if outrageous moment...
In comes I, the Undertaker, with a brace of mutes. The mutes, bearing between them a nice comfy box of elm, good old solid old elm. And what greets our eyes? Why, a handsome young couple, naked as nature intended, stretched out on the carpet and at it, hammer and tongs. Hurrah!
When we came to the lovemaking scenes, we had Mick Ford and Jill Lidston in the studio puffing and grunting and sighing and whatever. My Grams SM playing in the music from the 1812 overture, mixing the two together with the actors who could hear the music, trying to time their activities, shall we say, in time to the music.
Spectacular, well done, sir and madam.
Recording Puss in Boots was the most fun I've ever had in a radio drama studio. and the actors, somewhat breathlessly, concurred, although the production staff, faced with coordinating twanging bed springs, heavy panting, and Tchaikovsky's 1812 overture with canon, could not, at the time, see the funny side.
And I think she said we all looked a bit aghast. I just remember it as being a lot of fun. Each production I did had become a little bit more complicated, as if she'd really found her feet on Vampirella, and then added even more in with Company of Wolves, and by the time we got to Puss in Boots. I mean, it is a wonderfully imaginative piece of writing. I feel that she almost saw sounds.
Working on the fruitful paradox that radio is the most visual of mediums because you cannot see it, I decided to paint some pictures in radio. Not, I hasten to add, my own pictures, but copies of someone else's. I cheated a little because they were not only narrative pictures, i.e. pictures that tell a story, but also pictures that could be construed as telling tales about the man who painted them.
Come Unto These Yellow Sands is what Angela Carter called an artificial biography of the Victorian painter Richard Dadd.
The late Richard Dadd. Alas, we must so preface the name of a youth of genius that promised to do honour to the world. For although the grave has not actually closed over him, he must be classed among the dead.
He murdered his father and was incarcerated in Bethlehem Hospital.
There was a major exhibition of Richard Dadd's paintings called The Late Richard Dadd at the Tate in summer of 74. And Angela went to it, and we talked about it a lot afterwards. And it was the most complete exhibition there had been, and it includes this painting, Come Unto These Yellow Sands, which Richard Dadd painted to sort of celebrate his departure on a grand tour, which ended up at the Nile. And it's the most extraordinary painting, with these sort of... It's an illustration of Ariel's song from The Tempest, but here's these fairies dancing under a rock on a beach with the sea, and this arc of fairies going off into the distance. And it makes you think, you know, what did he think he was doing, actually, when he produced these sexless kitsch fairies? But it meant a lot to him. And that interested Angela. I mean, she was very, very interested in why were Victorians doing fairy paintings? Was it sort of some sublimation of sexuality because they are so asexual? What was going on? So what you get in the play is a whole series of perspectives on fairy tale.
When young, Dad had been very handsome, with his dark hair and his fine eyes, and such a gentle temperament, gentle as a lamb, yet full of liveliness and humour, devoted to his family, a wide circle of friends. Kind, generous, talented, a paragon. So much beauty, virtue and genius at 20, as if the fairies had touched him.
I loved her ability to cut and mix and use a technique almost like Eisenstein's montage in film. I think if I was asked to bring just one play to the table and say, this is what I'm really talking about, I think it's all really in Come Unto These Yellow Sands, which was broadcast in 1979. She uses all the artillery, all the equipment of radio drama to explore a mind gradually crumbling into insanity.
Titania sleeping. Oil on canvas, 25.5 inches by 30.5 inches.
Characters from his paintings come to life.
I am pictured in a kind of grotto, a recess composed both of flowers and of the tiny bodies of my attendant fairies, who are so intertwined.
Oil on canvas, 23.25 inches by 23.25 inches. Puck.
Whom he painted as a plump, white, juicy child, seated on a toadstool of a botanically imprecise description, with, directly above my head, a bindweed blossom, looking not unlike a particularly vulgar satin lampshade, because it dangles a fringe of pendant dewdrops for all the world like glass beads. Around my little pedestal, which looks far too frail to support my bacchic corpulence, dance dozens of those tiny nudes, dozens of them.
you move from a sort of a straight biographical narrative into this utterly deranged world of Richard Dadd's mind.
Ex over omnia. All things come from the egg. I shall eat nothing but eggs, the little emblems of eternity, round, with a germ of new life in the middle, and I shall eat eggs until I become eternal.
I hold my axe high in the air, and I shall bring it down upon this here hazelnut which I propose to split in half with one stroke, and so resolve the argument.
And so resolve the war within me.
The whole thing, it's an utterly mad world. And it could only be done in radio terms because of the ability for radio to be all and everywhere all at once.
Deep tonight, Oberon, king of the fairies.
She said it's a piece of cultural criticism. Well, that's true, and it's rather daunting the way she put it. But it's true because it's layered in ways so that bits of the play constantly contradict and criticise each other.
In Paris of the early 1900s, the height of the Belle Époque, polishing up his French in preparation for the diplomatic service.
The diplomatic service?
Since Artie had such a gift with languages, we thought perhaps the diplomatic service.
Polishing his French.
Tell me, do, of a place that soothes and lulls one, the Countess of Tolga considered. Paris, she hazarded?
In A Self-Made Man, she produces a wonderful dramatic biography of Ronald Furbank, who led a very bizarre, very unusual artistic and creative life with a very interesting historical, cultural background.
By the way, I wish you wouldn't call me Furbank. It gives me a sense of galoshes.
You cut from narrative voice to narrative voice, you fade up and down voices, and the whole production had a sort of a high camp quality, which I'd never heard in radio biographies before. That was unique.
I believe strawberries are the clue to my heart.
Mr. Furbank is much better. What an appetite he's got now. Yesterday for dinner, he ate a whole slice of toast with his caviar.
He ate as he lived, as he wrote, exiguously, but with tremendous style.
What Angela Carter did with her artificial biographies is just so different from your typical educational, dry introduction to somebody's life. They leave you to try and figure out what you think this character was like, and they don't claim to offer you a finite version of a life. I think it brings together all sorts of things that Angela Carter was doing in her other writing and her journalism, but in a really accessible and entertaining way. I think she never lost sight of the fact that radio is an entertaining medium.
In its most essential sense, even if stripped of all the devices of radio illusion, radio retains the atavistic lure, the atavistic power of voices in the dark, and the writer who gives words to those voices retains some of the authority of the most antique teller of tales.
In Writing in Three Dimensions, the words of Angela Carter were voiced by Rosie Cavaliero, and the programme was produced in Bristol by Sara Davies. Well, the news is next, and after that, you and yours will today be hearing about the plastic surgeons accused of cashing in on the faulty breast implant scandal, and also why there are some people who are still waiting for compensation from damage sustained in last year's riots. That's with Julian Warwicker, you and yours, at 12:04. Corey Caulfield will have the news on FM, and on Longwave, Neil Sleet will bring you the headlines and the latest shipping bulletin.
On BBC One, Andrew Marr concludes his look at the life and work of Queen Elizabeth II.
In this final episode of the Diamond Queen series, we look at the defining moments of her reign. And for the first time ever, all of the Queen's adult grandchildren have their say.
We all have massive respect for her and, love her to bits.
She's led the way, and long may that continue.
The Diamond Queen. This Monday night at 9 on BBC One and BBC One HD.